How about listening to the sounds of Istanbul? Beautiful, isn't it? But you can't discover the coolest city in the world just by listening. Check istanbul.goturkiye.com now and plan your Istanbul trip today.
We
are
cultivate.
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 We are cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and with me is my sister and co-host, Maddie Stengel.
Hello.
Hi. We were just discussing what a Monday of Mondays it was, or it is.
It's a very Monday feeling Monday today.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a reminder that we are still having a sale at our TeePublic shop, December 25th through the 31st, and you can get 35% off. So then you can start 2025 strong, rocking that Ye Olde Crime merch. So if you're interested, please take advantage.
It could be really fun. You could get a bunch of the shirts in like a super big size as like a muumuu and just like keep us while you're dreaming. Or get some shirts, some funny shirts for people to read while you work out.
Or you can get a journal and you can dream journal with us and think of us as you're dream journaling.
You're cold. Put a hat on.
Mm-hmm.
A Scully on it.
The possibilities are endless.
Endless.
And you can find the link to that in our show notes.
Yeah, got a Stanley Cup? Get some stickers.
There you go. Get some stickers.
Mm-hmm. Your Stanley's lonely.
It wants some Scully.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm excited about this week's topic.
Really? Because I really enjoyed last week's. That was fun.
You really liked Charlotte? I did. I liked Charlotte too. She was fun.
She was a good time. She was a good time.
She was a good time gal.
Mm-hmm.
So this week, we are going to be discussing the Hojun-maru and the Three Kichis.
Ooh.
Information was pulled from the following sources: a 2022 Big Think article by Tim Brinkhoff, 2021 Mental Floss article by Jackie Mead, 2017 National Park Service article, 2016 BiblioAsia article by Bonnie Tan, 2014 Nancy Marguerite Anderson blog post, 2014 Offbeat Oregon article by Finn J.D. John, 2013 Damn Interesting article by Marissa Brooke, 2010 A Blast from the Past post by Mike Dash, 2009 History Link article by Cassandra Tate, Atlas Obscura, Find a Grave, the Historical Marker Database, the National Library Board of Singapore, and Wikipedia.
Nice.
And links to all of these articles will be included in the show notes. We wouldn't be here without support from listeners like you. If you're interested in supporting us financially, you can leave a one-time or monthly donation over on Buy Me a Coffee or our Venmo page. Links are in the show notes. And we make a point of reaching out to send you a thank you note and stickers to show our appreciation.
Want to show your support in a more concrete way? Pick up some Ye Olde Crime merch over at our TeePublic shop. We shout out whenever there is a sale each month, and we work to make sure we're creating new designs and changing it up whenever possible. And hey, thanks for listening.
Now, it's been a while since we've traveled back to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And this week, we're going to be heading back to a time when instead of traversing the globe to seek more trade in goods, Japan closed down its borders to everyone.
Yep, I remember this.
Yep.
And honestly, good on them.
Yeah, right? Run by the shogunate, Hideyoshi Totomi, or the Great Unifier of Japan, banned missionaries in 1587.
Nice. Get that riffraff out of there. Christianity who? We don't want it.
10 years later, in 1597, Totomi ordered the execution of around 26 Christians, of which 20 were Japanese, via crucifixion.
Oh, dang. Okay, a little darker, little darker. I'm starting to disagree a little bit,
Yep.
with the methods, like religious persecution. But like not wanting them to be thrust upon you is one thing, but persecuting is another.
Yeah.
Kind of sucks, especially if it's your own people. And a crucifix too. That's it, and this was in the 1600s, 1500s, 1600s.
1597. So yeah, almost 1600s. Yeah.
That would be considered pretty barbaric at that point, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, they still, yeah.
Like,
Well,
dang.
starting in the 1630s, the period known as Sakoku, or locking the country, which is also occasionally known as Keikin, or sea restriction, not only
Okay.
kept foreigners out, but kept the locals locked in during the Edo period.
Mm.
Now, any Japanese who left the island were considered tainted by Western culture and would be killed should they attempt to re enter the country.
Now, okay, that escalated. Like, just going straight to murder?
Mm-hmm.
Dang. He really, just really locking it in. He's taking it
Yep.
very seriously. A little too seriously.
Non Japanese citizens weren't permitted on the island nation under threat of capital punishment. And in fact, only a select number of outside nations were allowed to trade with Japan, such as Korea and the Netherlands.
I love that the Netherlands is part of it.
Yeah,
They're like, you guys get it. You can stay.
yeah. So the Dutch weren't even allowed to dock at the mainland. Instead, they were restricted to Dajima, which is an artificial island in the Nagasaki harbor that was guarded day and night to prevent any foreigners from crossing the bridge into mainland Japan.
I remember learning about this from, I think I actually learned about it in school, which is really impressive
It
for
is impressive.
for my school system back in the day. They would have never talked about another country like
We
this
did
otherwise.
also briefly talk about this, I think, in the Okichi, the geisha story.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it was briefly mentioned then too. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So, fun fact, the only reason they allowed trade with the Dutch was because they were Calvinists. So they didn't try to convert anyone to their religion, which protected the Japanese from the threat of conversion to Christianity.
Nice.
So the only import that they received from the Netherlands was cloth and medicines, of all things.
Two very critical imports, I would
Mhm.
say.
Now, to go along with this, making long range ships was also illegal and would
Oh,
remain so well into the 19th century. This didn't stop smaller ships from traveling outside Japan, as it was needed to transport goods and people.
right.
And it was on one of these transportation expeditions that a cargo ship found itself at the mercy of the unpredictable forces of nature along the coast of Japan.
One of the many
One of the
sea
many
storms, monsoon, typhoon,
typhoons, yes.
hurricane. Just a really bad storm in general. The sea is terrifying.
On October 11th, 1832, a cargo ship, or Sengoku Bone, by the name of Hojun-maru, departed from the port of Nagoya and was in the process of transporting 150 tons of cargo, which included rice and porcelain from the south to Edo, or present day Tokyo. The cargo was set to be traded for salt fish from northern Japan. So it was much cheaper and easier to just use these smaller cargo ships to
Mhm.
transport rice from one end of the country to the other because it was so heavy and it was so difficult to transport it across the entire length of the country.
Yeah. But geez, like rice and porcelain, that would be really, really, really heavy.
So the ship, which was 15 meters or 49 feet in length and manned by a crew of 14 men, was transporting gifts for the shogun's annual tribute by navigating along the coast.
Mm.
See, all Japanese ships and boats weren't designed for the open sea.
Nope. The government kind of made that really clear.
Yep. So this single-masted vessel had large rudders that could be raised or lowered depending on the tide, which was great when traveling in shallow coastal waters.
Right.
However, in a storm or heavy seas, they could easily be torn off.
Yeah.
The crew wouldn't know it when they set out from Ise Bay on November 3rd, but they would be adrift for far longer than any of them could have imagined after they were caught in a violent storm. Many of the men aboard the vessel had been sailing since they were teenagers, but all that
Mhm.
experience meant nothing in the North Pacific Ocean with no means to help their vessel steer towards civilization after encountering the famous Kuroshio current.
Ah. Well, and no other ships would be out there too because of their very clear and present you can't sit with us
Yes.
laws.
hmm
So there's not even a ship to help them.
So according to Offbeat Oregon, quote, the Kuroshio current, after merging into the North Pacific current, crosses all the way across the Pacific Ocean to within a few hundred miles of the west coast of North America, moving at a rate of about 10 miles a day, end quote. Which is pretty interesting.
That is. Don't think those waters would play well together, right? Like, isn't the makeup a little different too? Like the mineral makeup, is that part of I don't know.
I can't remember which one's hotter and which one's cooler.
Yeah.
I know one of them tends to be hotter. Yeah. Anyway, mental floss noted, quote, also known as the North Pacific Current, the California Current, the North Equatorial Current, and the quote-unquote Black Current for the deep blue of its waters. The Kuroshio begins in the Philippines and flows past Japan before turning toward California, end quote.
Hmm. That's a big old grouping there. That's a lot of space to cover.
Mm-hmm. Months passed.
They were stranded for months
Months.
with uncooked rice and porcelain.
Mm-hmm.
And like probably a week's worth of stuff. Maybe two.
Well, I don't know. So the men were able to sustain themselves with desalinated water via a makeshift seawater desalination facility, which has been theorized to have been fashioned out of parts on board the vessel that had once upon a time been sake brewing equipment, known as
Stop.
ranbiki.
That's really clever. Good for them. Because, like, I was worried about that. Like, how are
Yeah,
they having anything that isn't saltwater? Because isn't it you can't even last like a day or two drinking saltwater?
it's like a couple days, yeah.
Yeah, it's really quick.
Additionally, there was plenty of rice on board, and on rare occasions, they were able to catch a fish or even a seabird to add to their meager meals.
Dang.
Rice, however, doesn't provide vitamin C, and as a result, many of the men aboard the ship died from scurvy.
Yeah. Isn't that like a horrible death, too?
Yeah, it's like you get disease in your gums, you start to
It's like really painful.
it's really painful, really bad. I think I remember reading that you like start bleeding from your eyes. Like it's not great.
Yep. Brain bleed, bleeding in the heart, spontaneous bleeding, stroke, loss of consciousness, convulsions, jaundice, nerve problems, destruction of blood cells,
Mm-hmm.
and organ failure and overall delirium.
Yeah.
Wow. No,
Yeah, it's
thank you.
not good. So by the time a year had come and gone, the crew of 14 had dwindled down to 3. 29-year-old Iwakichi, who was an artist and the ship's navigator, 16-year-old Kyokichi, and 15-year-old Otokichi, both of whom were apprentice cooks. and also like aspiring sailors.
They were stranded for a whole year?
More than a year. It wasn't until the Hojun-maru had been adrift for almost a year and a half that the ocean currents finally pushed the crippled ship ashore at Cape Flattery in January of 1834. They left in October of 1832.
If you saw that ship, how could you not believe it was like a ghost ship or something at that point?
Mm-hmm.
That would have been a horrific sight to
Yeah.
see.
Or like a mirage, like a optical
Yeah.
illusion.
Like, what is that?
Mm-hmm. Now, some places listed their arrival as December 1833, and some places also listed where they landed as Cape Alava. So I'm just listing all of that on the off chance that the stuff that I said first is wrong. But
Okay.
most places said Cape Flattery in January 1834. As you can probably imagine, the three men had no idea where they had landed, but readily went ashore to be free of the Hojun-maru.
Oh, yeah.
They were greeted on the Olympic Peninsula by members of the Makah group of indigenous seal hunters in present-day Washington state.
I bet they were like, hey, what's this, guys? Who are you?
The crew of the Hojun-maru had unknowingly crossed the entirety of the northern Pacific Ocean, some 5,000 miles.
Just to deliver some rice and porcelain to get some saltfish.
Yep. Fun fact, these three weren't the first Japanese castaways to make their way to North America. Those that had unwillingly come before, in similar circumstances, tended to land much further south. So this was the first time that the Makah had encountered Japanese sailors. However, over the course of the exclusion era, or the Edo period, which stretched from 1633 all the way to 1854,
Wow.
more than 1,000 Japanese ships would go missing, and of these, at least a few vessels carrying some 34 Japanese sailors made their way to the shores of North America or Mexico.
Insane. Yeah, when you said that before, I was like, maybe they're like, oh, hey, it's another one. But
Yeah.
no, this was the first time for them. Okay.
Yeah. They were like, what's happening?
What is that?
The Makah reportedly boarded the Hojun-maru and walked off with a number of items,
I'm sure.
including a map with Japanese kanji, a string of perforated copper coins, and ceramic bowls, before leading the three survivors to their encampment.
Like that's their payment for
Yep.
housing.
We'll take this. You come with us.
And they're probably like, we don't care. We're just happy to not be on that boat. We're
Yep.
not gonna get it for you. That
Yep.
boat is yours forever.
They graciously fed them, which saved them from developing scurvy, and they also took care of any other ailments they may have had. Like,
That's so nice.
who knows?
Man.
Unfortunately for the Japanese,
They couldn't digest anything, could they?
servitude was a common part of the local cultures. So they quickly found themselves enslaved, tied together with leather bindings throughout the winter, until the nearby people of European descent learned about their existence.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know many indigenous cultures that had slave labor. Do you know many that like really did to the point where it was called out in their culture?
No, but I
Like I would assume like prisoners of war, like that's kind of a common thing.
think that's kind of what this is. Like they were kind
Okay,
of
so
like,
they were like, we don't know who you are, we don't know if you're violent, so we're just gonna nip it in the bud.
yep, we're just gonna take you. Mm-hmm.
You're scary, so we're just gonna make you not scary.
Mm-hmm.
Bummer.
A record of the castaways was created and passed around amongst the Native American communities in the area.
Are these your three men?
Do these belong to you?
Do you know them?
It was a ye old milk carton.
Yes.
Like,
It was on like a water canteen.
the first iteration of the Stanley.
A water bladder.
Likely it was a drawing, as one of the survivors, and it's believed it was the eldest, Iwakichi, that he was an artist. And it's said that he sketched their ship, showing that it was jammed against the rocks at the beach, surrounded
Mhm.
by the macaw, who were actively taking items from it. And there was also a message written on it in kanji.
Mhm.
The macaw were so fascinated by it that they took the letter and they passed it around amongst all the tribes before it eventually ended up in the hands of a British fur trader and head of the Hudson Bay Company Columbia Department at Fort Vancouver named John McLaughlin.
It's always a John.
Now, John, aka the father of Oregon, had a fierce appearance. He stood at 6'5" tall.
Back then, he might as well be 7'11" in
Yeah.
today's standards.
So he was pretty much Paul Bunyan with long, prematurely white hair. This guy looked
Mm.
crazy.
Yeah, and if he was a fur trader wearing like his wares too, like if he's wearing a fur
Yeah.
hat and stuff, I'm sure he was a sight. Oh, I bet he loved it too. I bet he really played it up.
Now, despite this, he was known for being extremely fair and responsible when dealing with people from all backgrounds. Like he was
Wow.
the exception to the rule in
At
this
the time.
period of time.
Wow. Okay.
So John examined the description and the kanji that was also included with the
Mhm.
illustration, mistakenly believing them to be Chinese, which wouldn't
Well,
have been
right.
a bad guess.
That would have made sense to them because the Chinese were still able to travel freely.
Yeah, and considering the lack of real knowledge on the Japanese at the time, so
Mhm.
he immediately sent a party led by his stepson, Thomas McKay, in March to meet with the macaw.
What a great excuse to get rid of a stepson. Hey, deadbeat. I mean, Jim, go there. Maybe I'll love you when you come back if you do.
Hey, Tiny Tim, I need you to go on an expedition.
He's like, I'm 6'2".
Love you, Pop. To bargain for the release of the sailors. And at this time, the weather proved to be a barrier, making trails impassable. Because even in March, like in Washington, it's
Oh,
still
yeah.
like inclement weather.
Mhm.
Instead, John reached out to an American captain named William H. McNeil, instructing him to stop at Cape Flattery to, quote, do his utmost to recover the unfortunate people said to be wrecked in the vicinity of that place and reward the Indians for their trouble, end quote.
Mhm. Get them safely into our hands.
Yes.
Yep. Because I mean, they they loved that ship. You got something similar to the ship, you got a painting, they really like those. Those were pretty
Mm-hmm.
cool.
So John wrote on May 28th, 1834, quote, last winter, the Indians informed us that a vessel had been wrecked somewhere about Cape Flattery. A few days ago, I received through the Indians a letter written in Chinese characters. The Indians say the vessel was loaded with China wares, end quote. So like those porcelain cups,
Mhm.
which makes perfect
Yep.
sense.
Yep.
Captain McNeil of the Llama, which love it, was able to locate Iwakichi and Kyokichi on his first try on June 9th of
Okay.
1834, and then tracked down Ochokichi on his second pass through, because apparently at the time that he first came by,
Might have been
Otokichi
doing something.
was at the camp, like he was
Yeah.
further
He
inland.
was probably doing something.
Yeah. Now, all three men were then relocated to Fort Vancouver in July of 1834, which Fort Vancouver at that time was part of the Oregon Territory.
Mhm. How terrifying for these poor people, these poor guys.
Right?
Like, just wow.
So, fun fact, back in 1832, so 2 years before this.
Mhm.
Back in the hometown of Otokichi, the locals assumed that the entire crew of the Hojun-maru had perished at sea.
Yeah, I mean that's safe to assume, especially if this wasn't the first, second, or third time this has happened.
So they set up a gravestone to honor the dead.
Oh.
Fast forward back to July of 1834.
Mm-hmm.
An assistant at a local church at Fort Vancouver by the name of Cyrus Shepherd taught the three men English, noting that they showed, quote, very rapid improvement, end quote, and were, quote, remarkably studious, end quote, amongst the variety of other people currently living at the fort.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very lively bunch consisting of British, Irish, and French Canadian Hudson Bay Company employees who had established the fort.
Mm-hmm. That would have been a fun fort.
Oh, just wait. In addition to the Japanese, there were Hawaiian and a number of indigenous people also living there, as well as several bi or multiracial children.
Ooh. So a little bit progressive of a
Yes.
fort.
Yes.
Well, extremely progressive at the fort.
Given that time, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as long as the biracial children were treated like humans.
I don't know. I just knew they
We're
were.
gonna assume they were, and they were treated really well, and everything was fine, and they had a maypole, and everybody loved everybody.
And everybody loved the maypole, and nobody
Yep.
tore it down.
Nobody tore it
Nobody was a
down.
Puritan.
Yep. Amen.
Amen. Now, once John made the connection that the sailors were in fact Japanese and not Chinese, as he had originally thought, he
Mhm.
was even more invested in seeing them safely return to their closed-off home country.
No. Does he know about the whole like?
He didn't know. He didn't
Okay.
know. He was just like, I want to help them get home. He didn't know about the, like, we're going to kill you.
But like, you're tainted. Bye.
Yeah,
Like, I
yeah,
don't care if you're a miracle.
he didn't know about that.
Okay.
Because being a businessman, he was also very aware of Britain's many attempts to secure trade with the island nation.
And if he could do it, he'd look real good.
So John saw this as a perfect way to open up trade talks.
Mm. Yep. Which, if you were a reasonable person, that could be an idea.
It was an idea. To that end, after 5 months at Fort Vancouver,
Mhm.
he had all three men board the Eagle, which was a ship that belonged to the Hudson Bay Company, that
Of
set sail
course.
on November 15th, 1834, for a 7-month journey to England via first Hawaii, then south to the sea just outside Antarctica in order to avoid South America.
We just Hudson Bay Company just really didn't fuck with South America at the time.
I don't know. I don't know why.
He's just like, I don't like that place. Maybe
Maybe
it
they
was
were worried
because
about the
the Cape.
Spanish. I don't know. And because of the
Mm.
Cape. I mean, the Capes are notoriously bad. So,
Mhm.
Captain Darby of the Eagle was given the following instructions on the care for the castaways by John. Quote, the 3 Japanese you will take to England, and I request you will have the goodness to see that they are as comfortable and as well taken care of as their situation will admit. They are supplied with clothing and sufficient to take them to England, but if they should be in want of any little necessary article, you will please supply it on the Hudson Bay Company's account. End quote.
Cute.
So imagine John's surprise at learning that London officials had zero interest in not only
Mm.
the 3 men, but in trading with Japan at all.
Yeah, because they probably knew, right?
Well, the reason had to do with the fact that by 1835, Britain was already actively involved in trade agreements with China surrounding opium, which led to the first Opium War between the two powerhouses. So they were actively fighting with China about drugs. So,
Yeah. So they didn't want to mess with a tiny country close to it
mhm.
to instigate more
They were like,
war.
we got our hands full of
They're like,
drugs and war.
listen,
Like,
there's this bigger guy next to him.
we're too busy.
We all just want to get high, and they're
Yeah.
hogging it all.
Not only were the British not interested in exploring anything with Japan, they were also super annoyed at having to figure out what to do with the three men now that they had arrived in Britain in June of 1835.
Yeah. I'm sure no racism happened at all. Not
In
there.
fact, they sent John a bill to pay for the cost of taking care of them after forcing them to stay on the Eagle for more than a week after it arrived in London. It wouldn't let them disembark.
Yeah. They had no money, they had no prospects.
Yeah.
They didn't want to house them.
British officials thought it would have been cheaper and more sensible to have left them at the Sandwich Islands, aka Hawaii.
They honestly probably would have really enjoyed it.
They probably
Probably
would have.
would have had a great time.
And fun fact, the three were the first Japanese to disembark in England since 1587. Go them.
And they're probably like, we did not choose this.
Yeah.
I hate it here.
Finally, after giving them a short tour of London, which, second fun fact, they were the first Japanese to ever see the city, the British loaded the three men onto the steamer General Palmer, and King William IV sent them to the Portuguese owned port of Macau on the Chinese mainland in December of 1835.
That's a lot. That's a lot. So they were now under Portuguese protection in China
Yes.
on a British ship.
Ship. Yes. Once there, the Three Kichis, as they would be called, were warmly welcomed by a German missionary named Karl Friedrich August Gutzlaff,
The what?
who was stationed there to act as a translator on behalf of the British government.
Of course. Of course there was a German involved. Why
Mhm.
not? Let's just
Why
add
not?
to this little mixing pot.
Smorgasbord.
This little melting pot we've got going on here.
So for 2 years, the three men,
2 years.
yeah, 2 years, the three men were essentially trapped in Macau. And although Britain provided for them financially, they were never offered a chance to travel back to their home country. During their time there, they assisted Carl by teaching him Japanese, and they would alternatively receive English lessons from Carl's wife, Mary, at the Macau Free School. So it was a beneficial arrangement.
Yeah. For the situation.
Yes. Otokichi worked to help translate the Gospel of John into Japanese.
Uh-oh.
This version of the Protestant Bible, Johannes no Teori Yorokobi, that was written in katakana script, would be first published in Singapore in May of 1837. The American Bible Society would halt further production the following year in 1838, citing that the translation was inadequate.
Hate it. Wow.
It wasn't until an American tradesman named Charles W. King arrived in Macau with 4 other Japanese castaways from the Kumamoto prefecture in Kyushu, who had been found on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, and the surviving crew of the Hojun-maru were finally given the option to return home. Now that we have 7 of them,
We have too many for this spot, so let's just give them back finally.
now maybe we can do something with this because there's 7 of them now.
So at this point, did anybody know that they would be murdered immediately? Or is this
I'm
still kind of
sure,
shrouded in mystery? Because you know the missionaries heard talk.
I don't know.
You know the Chinese know.
The Chinese probably know.
They definitely know.
I don't know when the newest group of castaways how long they had been castaways prior to the Hojun-maru castaways
Mhm.
to know if they knew that if they went back, they would die. So, I don't know.
But, like,
Unclear.
wouldn't they know?
You would think, but
Wouldn't
also
you
if
be afraid to go home? Like,
but
truly?
also, like, if given the opportunity to die in my own country instead of amongst a bunch of people I don't know who speak a language that I don't speak and nothing
I mean, I would
familiar.
s the Sandwich Islands sound pretty great. I wouldn't mind being dumped there, where I know for sure I wouldn't get murdered, and the climate would be similar.
I don't know. All I know is that Charles, unlike the British, was delighted at the
Mm.
possibility of opening up further trade with the island nation on behalf of America. And given that he now had 7 of their countrymen with him, he was
Mhm.
hopeful that he had a valid reason to sail there.
He just crossed that bridge, didn't he? He just walked right across it.
So, on
Mm,
July 4th, 1837, he
great.
and the Japanese men boarded the
He
Morrison.
planned that day. You know that they stalled so that they could
Yep,
arrive on the 4th.
so they could leave on the 4th.
Mhm.
Independence. They boarded the Morrison, a trade ship, and headed to Japan. The Morrison approached Edo Bay on July 30th, but it was quickly greeted by cannon fire once the Japanese realized it was a foreign vessel.
Mhm. He was probably like, "That's too big." Gross.
Yeah, and get out of here. The ship was only slightly damaged, but now there was a new issue. They had no way of getting near the mainland.
Yeah.
So, Charles had the ship change course and instead head to Kagoshima Bay, where they once more attempted to make port and were once again greeted by cannon fire. Placed in an impossible situation, Charles was forced to comply and returned to Macau. In response to the cruel abandonment by their homeland, the Japanese sailors shaved their heads in a symbolic act indicating that they
Mm.
would turn their backs on Japan.
As they should have. Like,
Yeah.
it really sucks, but they weren't gonna be safe. And honestly, it sounds like China, aside from that fort in Vancouver, is the safest place for them to be right now.
Mhm. Now, it's unclear what became of all of the castaways, but we do know about Otokichi, who was part of the original 3 from the
Mhm.
Hojunmaru.
The artist, right?
No, he was one of the younger ones. He was one
Oh,
of
he was one
the
of the cooks, the aspiring chefs.
yes. Yamamoto Otokichi was born in 1817 in Onora, Japan, on the west coast of the Chita Peninsula in Aichi Prefecture. He was an apprentice sailor at 14 at the time that he joined the crew of the Hojun-maru.
He was 14.
Yeah, because he turned 15 over the span of the voyage.
That makes me so sad.
I know. Otokichi, who at this point was 20, decided to make the most of things and settled in Macau, before later moving to Shanghai, where he would go on to become a well-known translator for American and British traders.
Nice. Yeah, because he knows how to talk to white men and not be intimidated by them because he was bullied by them for a few years already.
Yep. He has also been recognized as the first Japanese resident in Singapore, which is pretty cool.
Wow. Okay.
Otokichi went on to become a British citizen, converted to Christianity, and assumed the English name John Matthew Oto-san, as he was often referred to as Oto-san or Mr. Oto by his shipmates and friends. So he was like, well, that just makes sense. I'll
Mm,
just make that my last name.
yeah. And so many little FUs to his country,
I know,
too.
right? In the 1840s, Otokichi worked for the merchant firm Dent, Beale and Company in Shanghai, not long after the conclusion of the Opium Wars, and soon became proficient in Chinese.
Nice.
He continued to work for the British, translating documents for trade and assisted with the repatriation of Japanese castaways like himself on Chinese or Dutch
Mm,
ships.
nice. Like, hey, been there. Let me
Yeah,
help.
yep. Otokichi was briefly married to a Scottish woman that he met in Macau, but she passed away from illness sometime after the birth of their daughter, Emily Louisa.
Aw.
It's hard to say if she passed shortly after Emily's birth due to complications or from
Mm.
illness, and then some other places said possibly they were divorced. I couldn't find anything. So
Hmm.
this is all that I was able to find.
She was just out of the picture
She
at
was
that
just
point.
no longer in the picture.
Mhm.
Not long after this, he remarried a woman from Singapore of German and Malay descent
Hmm.
named Louisa Belder Nee Brown. So Louisa Brown Belder, who he
Mhm.
met when they both worked at Dent Beale and Company.
Okay.
The couple would go on to have 3 children together, John William, Ida, and Julia.
All these super white names, man.
Well, yeah, he was at that point John Matthew Otosan.
I know. I just think it's so funny.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
the most basic names too, you know?
Mhm, mhm.
Like my my name now.
Yeah. In 1849, at the age of 32, Otokichi was able to sneak into Japan after posing as Lin A Tao, the son of a fictional Chinese businessman and translator, during a topographical expedition to Uraga Bay. He would do it again in May of 1849 aboard the HMS Mariner in Edo Bay.
Scary.
That same year, Otokichi purchased a burial plot in Singapore for his friend Carl's first wife, Mary, likely during a business trip there.
Mm.
And it wouldn't be until 5 years later, at the age of 37, that Otokichi was finally able to return to the land of his birth. Otokichi was part of the British fleet that traveled to Nagasaki under the command of Admiral James Stirling aboard the HMS Winchester for the signing of the Anglo-Japanese Friendship Treaty on October 14th, 1854. This opened up trade between Britain and Japan.
How surreal for him to be part of that
Mm-hmm.
when he didn't even know that they needed it when he
Mm-hmm.
first started his everything, you know?
Yep. Now, following the signing of the treaty, Otokichi chose to stay in Japan for a while, meeting with several important officials. He was even offered the opportunity to stay in his home 22 years after that fateful day he boarded and was lost at sea aboard the Hojun-maru.
That would be really weird though,
Yeah.
and almost traumatic, you know?
So they were like, we will reinstate your citizenship, should you wish it. Having been away from Japan for longer than he had lived there at this point, Otokichi instead chose to return to his family in Shanghai.
Yeah. Good on him. Like, that's not his home anymore.
He and his family later relocated to Singapore in 1862, where he was very handsomely rewarded for the part he played in securing a trade treaty with Japan.
I bet.
Unfortunately, that same year, he would have to bury his 4-year-old daughter, Emily Louisa Otosan, on November 11th, 1862, at Fort Canning Green. I
Oh,
don't know what she passed from. I'm assuming some sort of illness.
yeah.
Upon first arriving in Singapore, Otokichi lived on Queen Street and would later purchase a large colonial home on Orchard Road that had once been a large nutmeg and clove plantation.
Ooh, I bet that would smell amazing. Could you imagine?
It would smell so good there. He and his family lived in a 2-story home and had 2 servants.
Wow.
In December of 1864, Otokichi became a naturalized British citizen in Singapore, and not long after, he and his family took a trip to Europe, not returning until sometime in March of 1865. So kind of to
Just hanging out.
celebrate, let's just go on a trip.
Yeah, I bet because his kids probably got automatic
Citizenship, yep.
citizenship if they were born there.
And his wife would have already had it because she was
She was from Singapore.
born there.
Yeah.
Otokichi spent the final days of his life at a sanatorium in Sigla called Arthur's Seat, where he died on January 18th, 1867, a little before his 50th birthday from tuberculosis.
It makes me sad that, like, how prevalent that disease really, really was.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he likely got it when he was traveling in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a Presbyterian, he was buried at the Bukit Timah Christian Cemetery, but his remains would later be disinterred and relocated to the Choa Kukong Christian Cemetery. Inquiries about the location of Otokichi's remains started in 1937 in Singapore, and in the 1960s, more were made by the Japanese Bible Society that sparked interest from the people of his hometown in Mihama, Aichi Prefecture. They were like, oh yeah, remember that guy?
So you just wanted to know where he was buried?
Yeah, they were like, whatever happened to that guy? Where'd he go?
Weird.
On August 1st, 1989, a monument was dedicated in the crew member's memory by a Boy Scout troop from Hyogo Prefecture, and the inscription on the front, written in Japanese kanji, reads as
Mhm.
follows. Quote, in October 1832, the Japanese cargo ship Hojun-maru set sail from near Nagoya bound for Edo, or present-day Tokyo.
Mhm.
Disabled in a storm off Enshu-Nada, the Hojun-maru drifted for 14 months before running aground on the coast near Cape Flattery at the northwest tip of what is now Washington State. The 3 surviving crew members, Iwakichi, Otokichi, and Kyukichi, lived briefly among the coastal tribes before they were brought here to Fort Vancouver by the Hudson Bay Company. They were the first Japanese to arrive on the continent of North America. To commemorate the arrival of the first Japanese on the North American continent, the Washington State Centennial, the 1989 American-Japanese Boy Scouts joint training exercise, and to promote the continued friendships between the U.S. and Japan. This monument was donated by the Hyogo Boy Scouts Rover Troop to the people of the state of Washington, with assistance from the 1989 Washington Centennial Commission, National Park Service, and Japanese American Citizens League, dedicated on August 1st, 1989. End quote.
That is such an 80s, 90s thing to do.
I know, right?
It's like just a bunch of Boy Scouts and friendship.
Mm-hmm. In fact, the word friendship is emblazoned on the monument, and the dedication was attended by the Hyogo governor as well as 50 Japanese Boy Scouts.
So cute.
I know. The monument is located near the Fort Vancouver Natural Historic Site Visitor Center. In 1993, members of Mihama visited Singapore, and the following year a musical was performed at the Victoria Theatre about Otokichi's life.
Oh, cool.
In 2004, Otokichi's remains were once more exhumed, and this time cremated, before his ashes were placed in an urn at the Japanese cemetery off Yochukong Road. On February 17th, 2005, the mayor of Mihama, Japan, of which his hometown of Onora was now a part, along with 120 others, traveled to Singapore in order to bring a portion of his remains home on February 20th, 2005.
I don't know if he would have liked this.
Well, to date, Otokichi's cremated remains have been divided amongst 3 urns. The one at the Japanese cemetery in Hogong,
Mm-hmm.
one urn that was sent to Yosangi Temple in Onora, where it has been laid to rest amongst the gravestones crafted in memory of the sailors who perished on the Hojun-maru.
Mm-hmm.
And the final urn was given to his only known descendant, Junji Yamamoto, who is a descendant of his younger sister.
I don't think he would have appreciated this.
I wouldn't want
Like,
parts of my body all over
just
the place.
being kind of handed wherever
Yep.
and like being exhumed. Would you say at least 5 times? Like,
At that point, yeah. Moved, yeah.
yeah.
At the Yosangi Temple, one stone honors the dead, stating, quote, Tempo 3, October 11th, sailed from Toba Bay aboard Hojunmaru, Juemon's ship, end quote. Otokichi's unique life has been celebrated in a number of books and plays in both America and Japan, as well as a feature film titled Kairei in 1983, starring Johnny Cash, that did not do well. And that is the story of the Hojunmaru and the Three Kichis.
Really fascinating and incredibly sad.
Mm-hmm.
But I am glad that, like, for the most part, it sounds like they were able to have successful, fulfilling lives. I don't know how happy and, like, good it was, but it sounds like for the most part, they were able to progress in a way most wouldn't. Like, who gets chosen for those opportunities? Like, that's really cool that they were included instead of, because the white men participating could have easily just cast them aside.
Yeah. We'd love to hear from you, and there's a couple of ways you can reach out to us. You can email us at yeoldecrimepodcast@gmail.com, where you can send us story ideas, share any spooky stories you may have, fun gifts, or even just to say hello.
You can also reach out to us via snail mail. Remember mail? Our mailing address is Ye Olde Crime Podcast, P.O. Box 341, Wyoming, Minnesota 55092. Fun fact, we like to send out thank you cards with fun stickers you can't get at our shop, so it's worth the cost of a stamp.
Hello, I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
We're the husband and wife team behind the True Crime Podcast, And Then They Were Gone.
We're a weekly show that covers unsolved missing persons cases. These are cases that you, the listener, can have an impact on.
Some of the people you may have heard of, like Kristen Smart or Braceless Pisa. But we also bring you missing people of color and other cases that haven't gotten the mainstream attention that they deserve. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, or your favorite podcast app.
And this week's podcast plug is the And Then They Were Gone podcast. Each week, hosts Kona and Ethan go beyond the headlines and social media posts to do a deep dive into a different missing persons case. Do you hold the key to bringing someone home? It's part of the Darkcast Network, and we'll have a link to their show in the show notes.
That's always been one of my, like, secret fantasies, is, like, helping somebody, like, saving somebody.
Same.
Like, I don't know if I would ever be able to do it, but holy smokes, if I was able to, like, help somebody out with something like that, that would be so cool.
I know.
I just don't know if I'm observant enough to participate.
Same. If you love the show, the best way to support us is to leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Good Pods, CastBox, Podcast Addict, and or Audible. Links to all of these are in our show notes, or if you're already listening on one of these platforms, you know what to do.
Oh, and while you're at it, shoot us a question you'd like to hear us answer on the pod. We'll give you a special shout out and address your burning questions all at the same time. The weirder, the better. Submit them via link in our show notes or shoot them to us in our DMs.
And this week's listener question comes from Carrie Ann, and she would like to know, would you like to be the President of the United States or the head of state of a monarchy? Where would you rule if you were a monarch, if that's what you choose to do?
I would be a monarch, and I would be a monarch of one of the obscure islands somewhere in the United States that I could, like, purchase or something. And I would make it so that people could go, right? Like, if you had a boat or something, you could come to my island.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have a coffee shop and a bakery.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have just, like, free range pets, like feral cats and dogs that get to just, like, hang out too. So you can, like, it's like a unregulated cat cafe.
Nice.
On an island. And I would just charge you. You'd have to pay to come hang out. and you can come hang out and then leave whenever I want because I'm the king.
Yep, there you go.
But like minimal, like minimal effect. I don't want to run a lot. I
Yeah.
would not do well being a president, I don't think.
No, I don't think I'd like
And
it.
that is not the job I want. And I don't want to be a monarch. So I will be a monarch of me and animals that wouldn't listen to me anyway. So,
That's fair.
how about you?
I would also choose to be a monarch.
Mhm.
I would probably choose to be a monarch for another island. I'm thinking maybe something north of the equator,
Okay.
but not like super north of the equator, if that makes sense. So, like, it's warm, but it's not like super cold when it's the winter. And I would, yeah, just have like animal sanctuaries, and I would have my own pet capybaras and tegu, which is a giant lizard, and those would be like just my buds hanging out with me all the time.
I have a pot farm too, like a nice one, so I could make butters and stuff out of it.
What a shitty pot farm. That's the worst.
Could you imagine? And then like all the baked goods are just like gross.
Yeah,
Just slightly off and they don't get too high at all.
yeah.
Be like the worst reviewed island in the United
What kind of
States.
monarch has such a shitty pot farm?
And I'd be like, you didn't even have to come. Banned.
Her cats weren't even chill.
Banished.
All right. Thank you, Carrie Ann.
Thanks, Carrie.
What's something good you'd like to share?
We did a practice run of Christmas cookies this weekend, and I know what can and cannot ship well. So that's we were kind of testing like the crumbliness of it. So I know what I can make. So now I just need to make some, and then the goal is to share it with a couple of coworkers that live outside of the state that don't get to like hang out with us whenever we do in-person things. But it's a surprise. So I hope they don't listen to the podcast. I don't think they would. But if you do, shut up.
Sorry you
No, you
can't sit
didn't.
with us. Here's some cookies.
Here's some cookies. Yeah, because we had our an in-person recently, and they always joke. They're like, "Oh yeah, I bet it's fun." But I remember like when you do fully remote work and your
Yeah.
coworkers are able to meet, you do get a little jealous. You're like, "Man, I want to
Yeah.
hang out with you guys, even though I don't want to hang out with you because I don't want to work, but also I like you."
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
I'm
feel that.
excited. I hope they like the cookies that I make them. How about you? That's something good.
So I went to the doctor today for my second follow-up post-surgery and got most of my stitches out.
Nice.
I tore one, so I asked them to leave it in a little bit longer just because I'm paranoid.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been cleared to start walking with a cane as long as I am listening to my body and not like doing jumping jacks or whatever. So
Yep.
that's pretty cool because I tried to go somewhere using crutches on Friday night when we got invited to one of Thomas's coworkers' houses. It did not go
I bet
well.
that did not go well.
That's part of why I ripped a stitch because I fell on my foot at one point when I was trying to get on the curb and it did not end well. I am not a fan of crutches. If I could burn them, I would. But
Yeah.
I will say that the scooter I got this time, much better wheels. It is
Nice.
more off-road friendly.
More like
So
more razor friendly wheels. You remember razor
yeah,
scooters?
yeah. These are like rubber wheels, like thick, like
Nice.
hockey puck rubber type wheels. So
Nice.
built Ford tough wheels,
Nice.
one might say. Although I'm also just as happy to not be using that anymore because I get exhausted using it. I'd rather walk. So
Right.
yeah, one step, pun intended, closer to recovery. So that's good.
Awesome.
All right, shall we?
Let's do it.
Want to be social with us? You can see pics from this week's episode, bonus content, and funny memes on X at Ye Olde Crime Pod, or on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube at Ye Olde Crime Podcast.
Speaking of YouTube, we have a special playlist just for our Can You Crack the Cramp Word segments with our guest podcasters to see who can correctly guess the meaning of some obscure Victorian slang terms. If that's your thing, check it out.
And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay,
And I'm Madison.
and we'll see you next time with another tale
As old as crime.